1. Literally, as I'm writing this, I'm hearing footsteps on my front porch. It's 4 a.m. and no one should be out there, but you got me bent if you think I'm going to check to see who or what it is. They're just pacing back and forth from where the steps get on the porch to right outside my window, and even banging on the wall right beside my bed. My family and I have been experiencing paranormal things heavily for, I think, 4 days now. And we did before, but they stopped for around 3 months and have just started up again. There's a lot to it, but I'm gonna do my best to put it all together from a previous post. So for the past few months, my boyfriend and I have started living alone together in a house we previously lived in, but with his grandmother. She moved out when we had our son, so now just us and our 3-month-old. It started before she left, though. We are surrounded by woods on every side, the backside being the thickest and the two on either side of the houses being thin, and you can actually see through them in fall and winter. Neighbors on all sides, most being family, but to the back, it's a long gravel driveway that leads to, I think, 3 different houses, so still probably a half-mile to a mile of woods in that direction. Anyway, we heard a whistling sound in the woods. Not like what you're thinking, but an actual human whistle. And it didn't really seem too scary at first. We assumed it was some crackhead or someone walking or something. But then it started bouncing from being heard on the left side of the house in the woods to directly in front of the houses in that patch of the woods, then back and forth, and occasionally to the right of the houses, moving inhumanly fast, never stopping. We heard that only at night, and every night, for at least 2 weeks, then on random nights scattered here and there. Boyfriend was actually convinced that it was someone messing around in our property, so one night, when the whistle was closer to the house than normal, he loaded a gun, got a flashlight, and went to investigate while I stayed on the porch of the bigger of the 2 houses on the land, closer to where the whistle was at that moment. He walked to the tree line and said something to the effect of, "Whoever's out there needs to leave or I'll shoot," just in case it was some of his family that lives around us messing around in the woods. He said he heard something rustle the leaves on the ground too close for comfort, so he shot at the ground in front of him to try and scare it or them off. And immediately after that, the whistle stopped. We heard it on different nights down the line, but never that close after that. We started to notice that if it was silent outside, and we talked about the whistle, it would appear. I started joking that it was a skinwalker trying to scare him. No clue what it actually was. Not sure how long after, boyfriend and I were in the bigger house on the land, in the kitchen, about to walk to the front door and leave to come back to our house. There's a hallway connected to the kitchen. As you're walking out to the right and straight ahead is the living room and front door. I'm walking behind him, and as we're walking out, I pass the hallway to the right, and I'm facing the door, my back to the kitchen window. My right eye was sort of covered by my hair, so my view was obstructed, but I saw someone beside me in the hallway, and it was normal for boyfriend's mom, who lives in that house, to wake up randomly and take her dogs out during the night, especially when we were over there making noise. So I figured it was his mom, although all I saw at the corner of my eye was a dark figure about my height. It was too late for me to move out of the way, since I was already halfway past the halfway mid-step, so I didn't have time to avoid bumping into her. I felt myself bump into her and brush against her shirt. After I passed, I turned to apologize to her, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The house was mostly dark, and everyone was asleep. So naturally, I grabbed the back of my boyfriend's shirt and pushed him and said, "Go, now!" And we ran back to our house. Before I told him, he said he didn't see anything there when he passed that spot. Then I had our son, and his grandmother moved out. Maybe the 2nd or 3rd morning, being alone in the house, we wake up, and he tells me how he woke up in the middle of the night to someone almost dramatically laughing. He didn't say where the sound was coming from, but he said it was a man's voice. I didn't really believe him out of my own fear, but I tell him it must have been scary and try to comfort him. 2 nights later he was off work, and was going to get up with the baby that night, so we had switched spots in bed, so I could sleep on the side I like that's up against the wall. I don't know what time it was, but I woke up in the middle of the night that night, to the sound of a man laughing hysterically. Sounded exactly like at the end of the Thriller music video when Vincent Price laughs creepily, but in a different voice, and went on for much longer. So, being half asleep, I turn over to tell my boyfriend to be quiet or he'll wake the baby. But boyfriend is dead asleep. Baby is dead asleep. I can still hear the laughing, so this jars me almost fully awake, and I sit up, and now realize the laughing sounds like it's coming from right outside the wall beside our bed, which means that whatever it was had to be outside, either right at the wall or the window above our bed. But you got me bent if you think I'm checking to see who's laughing at probably 3 or 4 a.m., so I just went back to sleep. Whistling and the laughing have stopped since winter came, but have been replaced by creaking in the loft in our house, which we stayed in while his grandma still lived here, as if someone is moving around up there. I can see into the loft from the bed and couch. It's a tiny house. But I've never seen anything up there. But 3 days ago I heard the creaking again, and looked up there from the couch, but of course found nothing. Looked around the house because I was alone and freaked out. Still nothing. Go to the door and flip on the porch light and look out the curtain. Again, nothing. But just as I'm about to turn around to sit back down on the couch, something touches my arm. So I spin around, scared out of my mind as to what or who. I'll see when I do. And nothing. Later that night, I have to pick up boyfriend from work, so I'm driving along on this bumpy back road at 9 p.m. because I refuse to take the interstate, and come up on this sharp curve in the road. The road is fairly new to me, so it surprises me, and I hit my brakes and look in my rear view to see if there's any cars behind me about to rear-end me, or just randomly slamming on my brakes, and I see a whole figure of a man in my back seat against the glow of my taillights. I look at the road because I need to turn or I'm gonna wreck. And when I look back, he's gone. I rushed to my boyfriend's job and got out of the car and waited for him because fuck that. Next night, I'm home alone again while boyfriend is at work and start to hear creaking in the loft. I'm scared, so I start recording to see if there's anything and hopefully show myself there's nothing to be afraid of. I record the whole house back and forth a few times, and in the video there's nothing in the loft for the first time. But when I come back, there's what I see to be a face, a white aura-looking thing at least. I start praying and getting my things together to go to the other house to wait for my boyfriend, but my robe is in the bathroom, which is under the loft. I rush to get it anyways. As I'm walking out, I'm looking up there and hear someone step onto one of the steps, but see nothing. These steps make very distinct noise when stepped on because they're 2x4s. I just ran. I tell boyfriend what happened. We go back home, and we're sitting in our living room talking about it all when I hear something upstairs. Then our front door slowly creaks open on its own. We went and talked to his parents, and they said to ignore it, give it no power, etc. But his dad was a preacher, so he goes over and blesses the house and says everything is okay now, and that we can go back or sleep over there at their house if we're scared. We end up sleeping in our house, and the only weird thing I can remember from that night is that I was awake late while everyone else was asleep, and I heard a tapping on the wall right next to me on my left. My son sleeps in a thing that swings, and it does make a rhythmic clicking. This was much different and much louder, but very much in sync with the swing, and directly by my head outside the wall. Swing would click, then a loud tap, back and forth for around 3 minutes and stopped. This would have been last night, I believe, but I was up again alone while everyone else was sleeping. I was in bed next to my boyfriend, and our son was in his swing by the stairs. All of a sudden, I hear what sounds like a broom falling onto another broom, like 2 pieces of thin, hollow metal clinking together towards the kitchen area so loud that I jump and get scared and wake my boyfriend up to investigate. but there was nothing that had fallen at all. This morning the door opened on its own again, and we heard a few creaks upstairs, but nothing major. Now tonight, boyfriend was walking from his mom's to our house and swears he heard the breathing of someone running behind him very close. No footsteps or leaves or anything, just the breathing. I heard him scream when it happened. Then a second later he rushed in, locked the door, and told me what happened. We stayed inside most of the night. Now I'm rewriting all this because when I started writing it, I was hearing footsteps on my porch pacing back and forth, then a loud bang on the same wall right beside me. At one point it sounded like it was on the roof above me. Then I heard someone take a few deep breaths right beside me, as if they're inside the wall or sitting right beside me on the bed. I try to wake my boyfriend up, but he's exhausted today, so he doesn't want to wake up, and I'm terrified. I don't know what's fucking with us, but I want it to stop. Two, this happened when I was 21. I'm female, and traveling by myself in Australia on a work permit. During this trip, with a few weeks in between, I experienced two different things that I want to share with you all. It might all be a coincidence or explainable, but it has definitely still left me questioning. First couple of months were chill. I had an apartment and a job in Melbourne, and the last few months I went traveling and backpacking. I had a bunch of amazing people in hostels and other places who I planned trips with. I was couchsurfing in Perth with a German traveller, and stayed at two German guys' place. They were okay, apart from the fact that we were a little weirded out when we heard the altar-looking part of the living room with a big picture of the girl with candles beneath was one of the guy's ex-girlfriends back in Germany. Anyways, it was the first night sleeping on their couch, and my friend fell asleep way before me. Outside the kitchen window, a chill party could be heard by the neighbor's swimming pool. I slumbered off, got half asleep, half awake, until I heard an older man's voice in my ear, calmly but firmly, saying my name, Benelobo. This woke me up completely, and just lay there on the couch, wondering who this voice in my dreams belonged to, thinking it reminded me of my late grandfather's. At the time, I noticed I could still hear the pool party going on outside. Then I heard the most awful screams coming from outside. Multiple people screaming, "Help! Help! Call 000! Call 000!" I just laid there. I was too afraid to even go to the window. I thought somebody's leg must have been severed off in a horrific accident or similar. I completely froze on the couch for several minutes, hoping that some of the people attending the party would be able to call for help. I felt terrible for freezing in this situation, and after a while the noise and screaming went away. I got up, went to the kitchen window and looked out the window, and nothing there. People chilling around the pool, drinking beer and laughing like nothing had happened. I went back to the couch, felt pretty strange, and fell asleep. The next morning I told my German backpacker friend about it, and she just brushed it off, saying it was a weird dream, and I thought it probably was as well. Later that day, late at night, me and my friend were sitting on the same couch watching a movie. That was until screams and yelling were coming from outside the apartment, the exact same as the night before. "Help! Call 000!" This time we both heard it, and I went straight out the door to see what was going on outside. And that's when I saw that the apartment just underneath us was on fire. I called the fire brigade. Fire was put out and nobody was hurt. A few days later, me and my friend went traveling around Western Australia, and we met two Swedish guys. We found a camping spot together, hung out drinking goon or whatever, and talking about life. I eventually ended up deciding with these guys that whenever we would go back to Melbourne, we should drive together. One of these guys ended up staying in Western Australia, so it was just me and this one Swede driving from Perth to Melbourne together, about 3,400 kilometers. We decided to only drive throughout the day and set up camp before the sun went down, in order to escape the endless marching of the kangaroos crossing roads at night. We'd been going for a few days, having an amazing time. We would find a camping spot using an app, set up a tent, make camp stove dinners during sunset, have a few drinks, then go sleep in our tent. One day we needed to find a spot to camp as the sun was setting soon, so we rushed to a spot. This was not a nice spot compared to others. It was right by the highway, like 20 meters, and there were no other campers or facilities. I was frying some nice instant noodles with eggs in a pan, while my friend was setting up our tent. A big white pickup came into this graveled area next to where we were putting up a tent. An older man came out, probably in his 50s or 60s, and started talking to us. He was like, "Why are you two young people camping out here? You know everybody can see your tent from the highway. You'll never know what people can do." I was trying to talk with this guy, telling him we were fine, and he kept saying we should go camp further down in the forest. He was acting so odd. Instead of conversing and replying to what I said, he sounded almost scripted as he talked, keeping on insisting that we went camping further down in the forest. At last I said, "Yeah, sure, we'll go camp down further in the forest." This is when he left us again, driving off in his truck. My friend, otherwise super outgoing and chill, had been completely frozen this whole conversation, and just looked at me with his wide eyes. "Benelobo, do you really want to camp further down in the forest?" Not knowing that I had really just tried to make the guy leave, I replied, "Hell no, we're getting out of here." Pretty unnerved and anxious, also about driving because it had now turned dark. We packed down, got into our car, and tried to get as far away as we could. My friend also said, "Did you notice he left off in the same direction as he came?" The last even trace of residency on the roads we came by was 100 kilometers in that direction. Why would he drive here and go back in that direction? It was tough finding a new spot to camp, and we found another completely empty spot. It was 100 kilometers away, and possibly the first camping spot we hit again. We put up our tent pretty close to the highway here as well, and went in. I fell asleep after some time, still not feeling good about the whole situation. That was until I was woken up by my friend whispering in my ear, "Wake up, I think someone is outside our tent." I froze. I could also hear the footsteps around the tent. We both lay there completely frozen, thinking of ideas how to escape this situation, possible weapons we could use. There were shadows on the tent as well. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Not before or since. Then we heard a dingo starting to growl and aggressively bark outside. The barking came closer and closer to our tent, and we could hear the dingo running around our tent. After a while, the dog stopped barking, and there was no more sound of footsteps, and I heard a car leave on the gravel. I'm pretty sure that dingo saved our life that night, as a protector of some sort. I haven't been able to confirm this, but about a week later, me and the Swede were at a house party in Melbourne talking to a woman about our scary camping experience. She just told us that she's heard of a lot of people going missing around in that area at the moment. It was about 100 kilometers away from Adelaide. Any Australians know anything? I wrote this last night, and thought I'd post the next day, today, after cleaning up typos and such. And this morning, I saw that I had a memory on Facebook from 7 years ago. Moving our camp 100 kilometers away from the spot we first set it up, as we may have just met the next backpacker serial killer here. Don't want to star in the next Wolf Creek. I had no idea it was on this exact day. A few hours later, my mom told me that it's my grandfather's birthday today, and that he would have been 91. I definitely lit up a candle. 3. Recently, my friend and I were recalling unexplained and possibly paranormal experiences we've had in the past. And I remembered this one that I'd pushed out of my mind. Honestly, for a good reason. Both of us are believers in the paranormal, but also try to find a scientific and logical answer of what we've experienced before jumping to a paranormal explanation. However, neither of us were able to reach a logical conclusion on what I'm about to describe. Firstly, a bit of backstory. The house I grew up in was in a neighborhood almost completely surrounded by forest and greenery. While that sounds like it would be tranquil to be around, it was not. Myself and other friends of mine have felt very uneasy walking through those woods even in the daytime. And not just the usual, I feel like someone's following me. Feeling you sometimes get in forests or other areas like that. It felt like someone was watching you from the second you stepped into the woods. My house was on a street extremely close to the forest. It was about a 2-minute walk from my house to the main trail. Off the main trail, you were immediately met by thick forest. There were few small clearings before a huge open field behind the forest itself, so it would take a long time to fight your way through the large forest before getting there. Very few people would make the trek out there, so I could always almost guarantee that every time I went out there, I would be able to enjoy the nature in serene isolation. In the warmer months of the year, I liked to spend my free time walking through the forest, especially in fall when the leaves had all turned orange and red, just before they would start to fall from the trees. This story takes place on one of those fall days. I had been walking through the forest listening to music with my earbuds in for at least a couple of hours. The last time I had ran into anyone else was around an hour ago, as per usual for my walks, even though I knew I was probably very alone apart from various wildlife. I remember still not being able to shake the feeling that someone was very close to me. The sun was also setting, so any sane person would be heading home by now anyways. After walking for a while longer, I decided to eventually start heading back in the direction of the main trail. By this time, the sun was barely still out. It was getting dark pretty fast. I had almost made it to a pretty nice clearing, but there was no way in hell I was going to go there only to have to walk home in the dark in the forest for hours, especially since I was very unsettled. As I turned around to head back towards home, I heard a voice muffled by the music playing in my earbuds come from behind me. I had been in very deep thought for a few minutes, so I was a bit startled, but assumed I had accidentally spoken out loud to myself. Before I could even take a couple steps further, I heard someone speak again. Fully aware of my surroundings now, I froze dead in my tracks, my heart pounding as I took my right earbud out and sharply turned around to see who was behind me. I was horrified to see a person standing with her back towards me, looking off in the distance. Everything about them looked so familiar, and it took me a couple seconds to come to the horrifying realization that I was staring into the back of myself. It was wearing my dark navy and white plaid jacket, the black hood of the very hoodie I was wearing resting on the collar of my jacket, even my same short blonde unkempt hair, with its brassy undertones shining in the last bit of light left from the setting sun. And then it spoke again. Not too far ahead now, in my voice. My exact voice, cadence, tone, everything. It took me a second to snap out of the paralyzing fear I was in and book it home. I didn't try to speak to whatever it was. I just ran as fast as I could to the main trail and out of the forest. As I ran, I could have sworn I had heard someone chasing me the whole way out of the forest, which might have just been a product of being hyper-aware of my surroundings and my state of fear. But I didn't dare look behind me because I was terrified of what I might have seen. I looked behind my shoulder to check. After nearly tripping on fallen branches and stumps 1,000,000 times, I tore out of the forest and onto the road adjacent to my street. I kept running until I was on the complete opposite side of the road from the edge of the forest. I turned around, and the only thing I saw there were the bushes and branches I pushed through on my way out, springing back into their natural place. I stood there staring at the forest for a minute, before heading home in fear whatever that was would pop out, but saw nothing. I didn't go back into the woods for some time after that. At almost every returning visit, I brought a friend with me. My friend told me she also had an odd experience in those woods, and so had her sister. They had both seen tall, dark figures standing in the woods when they took walks through the forest together. One of them would see the figure, say nothing about it to the other, and then book it out of the forest together. I'd seen similar figures, but had written it off as me seeing shadows from bigger trees, my mind playing tricks on me, etc. I'd blocked this out of my memory for a long time, until my friend brought up her strange experiences in the forest, and how she constantly felt uneasy in it. Still, to this day, years later, I cannot come up with a rational or scientific explanation for what I saw, and I have had little luck looking online for answers too. By far the craziest thing I've ever experienced. 4. 2 years ago, I was sent to Utah to help build a large warehouse in Jordan, which is one of the many smaller cities surrounding Salt Lake City. I was happy to get out of my home state, Arizona, and get into the lovely fall weather and mountain cool air that Salt Lake City is known for, as well as getting all the incentives the company was offering for out-of-state work. My crew had about 4 days off the entire month of October, so we took every opportunity to explore the city and experience nature. I looked into all the local hiking trails and was able to find Donut Falls on a hiking list. The falls looked impressive in the photos online. It ran through a cave and fell into a creek that went down the mountain, just the type of scenic nature I miss out on in Phoenix. That Saturday we were working another long shift. It was a beautiful, cloudy day with fluffy, humid snow showers. We got out just after noon, and I invited my 2 co-worker buddies to come along. I returned to my hotel, did a quick change into casual winter wear, canvas shoes, jeans, sweater with layers, and met my co-workers downstairs, and we all piled into my car. My heater had just gone out that week, but I wasn't concerned about it, as the fans still worked and we were dressed pretty warm for the mild evening chill. The snow was still quite light, so we hadn't planned for any intense weather on the trip. Thus, working in -0°F weather overnights had acclimated us to the cold conditions. We drove the short distance from South Jordan to Big Cottonwood Canyon and made our way up the winding road, taking in all the woodland ambience that surrounded us. The road eventually passed a small parking area that opened up to the Donut Falls trail ahead. We parked and prepared for our trek up the trail. The snow had started to pick up and was now making larger flakes, but we brushed it off because a little inclement weather wasn't about to stop our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see some amazing wilderness. The hike was pleasant. We had a snowball fight, shared a flask and told stories about skinwalkers and our cultural folklore. The trail was mildly challenging. It followed a creek up the canyon, crossed it several times, and even wove through trees and light brush. We passed what I believe was a small ranger cabin about halfway up the trail, and the forest began to become more dense around us as we progressed. Just before dusk we reached the falls, where we had to maneuver over the creek and around a little pond that formed in the valley between boulders below the falls. Everything was covered in snow and water, which rewarded each of us with wet shoes and photos of the scenery. While I was balancing a boulder, trying not to slip into freezing water for a photo, 2 distinct figures poked up across the pond that we had to shimmy our way around to reach the falls. They were quite the distance away from us, about 100+ feet, so I wasn't able to take in all the intricate details of their facial features. But I was able to discern a middle-aged man and woman. She held on to the man's arm, while his other arm extended above and held a black umbrella for both of them. What made them notable was the fact that they were wearing completely black outfits, black trench coats, black pants, black boots, black gloves, and black hats. This was out of the ordinary from all the hikers we passed on the way up, all of whom wore standard hiking attire, windbreakers, snow jackets, hiking boots, etc. I pointed them out to my co-workers, and we continued to take photos for each other, while the snow continued to weigh heavier and the clouds quickly began to lose their luminescence. The couple stood atop the trail at the beginning of the pond, took in the view for a few minutes, then turned and disappeared down the trail faster than they had appeared. Seeing that the couple didn't even take the time to get close to the falls, we realized that we had to head back down the trail if we wanted to make it back before we got snowed in, or it became completely dark. We quickly made our way around the pond and creek back to where the couple was, trying to see if we could catch up closer to them so our groups would be a little closer. I assumed they were locals and knew the trail better. We caught up to where they were standing, but to our surprise there was no sign of anyone being in the area. Not a single print. A playful panic began to rise as we started to jog back down the creek, looking for signs of the couple or the trail. While we rushed down, we came into a fork in the creek. We weren't sure which way to head back to the trailhead, but I was able to convince my coworkers to trust my intuition and take the left fork despite their desire to take the other fork. We continued along the creek and found the ranger cabin, which indicated to us that we were in the clear. Soon enough, we had reached my car. Then, after clearing the 2 inches of snow that had accumulated and some fancy ice driving in the dark, we were back in Salt Lake City. The image of that mysterious couple we encountered that year stuck with me. I have no idea who they were, what they were doing up there, where they came from, or where they went. We found no signs of anybody being on the trail on our way down. I looked at the trail on satellite images and found no alternative locations or trails they could have went to. In hindsight, it was foolish to be on the trail that late in such conditions. I briefly looked into the local legends, but never found anything similar to the couple we saw. Utah has an interesting history with religion and colonization. It's Ted Bundy country, after all. I have no doubt that Salt Lake City attracts dark paranormal entities, but since I have not found any resemblance in local legends, I simply identify them as Death and his companion, Misery. 5. Back in 2011, I was living in a rural town called Monroe in Utah, finishing up my senior year in high school. Monroe is a town of around 2,000 residents and is home to one of the largest mountains in Utah, which my grandparents' house, where I was living at the time, resided at the base of. Our house was on the top of a foothill and overlooked the quaint Monroe Valley. The house itself was about 3,500 square feet, with an entryway and foyer that was approximately 25 feet high, and had a front room on either side of the entryway, and then the main living room and kitchen towards the back of the house, facing the mountain. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, a small library, and then a balcony overlooking the foyer. The basement was a house itself, complete with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Hopefully this paints y'all a picture of the setting. At this point in my life, my grandpa had been recently diagnosed with cancer. Because we didn't have a hospital in the area with an adequate treatment center, my grandparents temporarily moved to southern Utah, where there was a hospital, and left me with the house to finish off my high school graduation in part of the summer, May to July. Because of this, my house was notorious for having the boys over, where we'd have parties and then play massive games of hide-and-seek in the dark. Sounds childish, but man, it was fun. I was also keen on having my friends over at all times because being alone in a large home is creepy sometimes, and also because I had several encounters with spirits at one point in my life when I was living with my mom, but that story is for another time. Anyway, I didn't want to be alone in the house and preferred having people over. Well, right around the middle of June, I had 2 of my best friends over, Jake and Sam, and each of us had a girl over and had picked a room to hang out with them. If you're a religious person, then you probably believe that certain activities aren't necessarily inviting to the Holy Ghost. And let's just say my 2 friends and their girls at my place were doing what would be considered uninviting to the Holy Spirit. I was with my best friend's sister and had recently been baptized, so I wasn't trying to get down with this girl at this point. Well, I heard a door shut, and my 3rd friend, Jaden, shows up after having gotten down with his gal at her place. Now, I say this because if you're heavily religious, then you believe that the Holy Spirit was probably not in the house at all on this particular evening. Because if you aren't religious, then disregard this paragraph. We end up sending the girls home, and it's just us boys enjoying our senior summer playing Call of Duty Zombies, which I wasn't really into, but I enjoyed watching my friends play. Well, 2:30 a.m. starts to roll around, and my friend Jake asks if we want to play hide-and-seek in the dark, but with 2 caveats. 1, we play the game while the Call of Duty Zombies theme song plays throughout the house, and 2, no hiding in the basement because it's pitch black. Looking back to this night, the moon was fairly bright. so your eyes would adjust quickly to the night time if you were hiding and seeking upstairs but not at all downstairs. Jake and Sam and I were into scary shit, but Jaden wasn't the biggest fan of it. Regardless, we all decided to play the game to this creepy music, and Jake was the first one as seeker. Sam, Jaden, and I immediately agreed to be bastards and hide in the basement because we knew it'd take Jake forever to find us. So we hide in one of the bedrooms that were filled with a bunch of wooden chairs. About 10 minutes into him screeching, we hear him come downstairs, and he begins talking to someone or someones on the basement stairs. We then hear him yell something to these people, and he enters the room we're hiding in. He starts moving loads of these chairs and finds us, and we start giggling like girls because we knew we broke the rules. We ask him who he was talking to, and he says, "Dude, I thought I was talking to Sam and Jaden, but all of you guys were here, so I have no clue who the silhouettes were on the stairs. They were just looking at me and ran away." Jake loved scary shit, so we shrugged it off like it was typical Jake trying to make a situation scary or creepy at night. Anyway, 15 to 20 minutes is a long time for one round of hide-and-seek, so we decide to chill in the living room, on the main floor, while the Call of Duty zombie music is playing dimly in the background. After a few minutes of us hanging out, I say, "We should watch the real exorcism video. I bet I can find it online." So I bust out my Mac and start searching for a video on obscure websites, and finally find a vid. Jake was all for this, but Jaden and Sam were hesitant, understandably so. But I'm me and I don't give a fuck, so I turn it on. Interestingly enough, this was shortly after 3 a.m. and was during the witching hour, which I didn't think about until after the fact. So Jake and I are watching this priest just douse this random woman in holy water while the priest is chanting Hebrew at her. The girl is strapped to a table and her body is convulsing like the chick from The Ring. I remember watching this video and getting cold chills immediately, but I was mesmerized because I'd never seen anything so raw and real of this nature. I couldn't look away. Sam and Jaden tell me to turn it off, and even Jake looks hesitant. This is where things go south real quick. About 20 seconds into this video, I start hearing a knocking noise. This knocking noise was coming from the master bedroom directly above us in the living room, and it continually gets louder and louder and louder. And suddenly it sounds like 4 or 5 people are running and slamming violently into the walls in the room above us. I look at Jake's face, because he was sitting next to me, and I can barely make out a look of horror on his face, because again the lights were turned off everywhere in the house. Then I hear the chandelier in the foyer quake, and at this point I'm on high alert thinking, oh shit. Despite Jake fooling around this night, he was a relatively goody-goody, and I'd never heard him say the F-word. But he immediately screams, "Turn it the fuck off!" I slam my laptop shut, and all 4 of us run directly to the back doors, which were 10 feet away from us. As we're running, we hear a loud thud, 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 as if someone is punching the basement, crawling from underneath us. It sounded like someone or something was trying to just tear through the floor beneath our feet. We make it outside during this time, and everything in the house goes silent. No more running from upstairs, no more chandeliers swinging, and no more punching ceiling noises from the basement. It's just us in the middle of the open night sky, torn between trying to look away from the house and towards the mountains, but simultaneously checking to see if something was going to run out of the house. The house was dead quiet, as if nothing ever happened, and we were all gazing into the house from the backyard. We were probably out in the backyard for 2 minutes in complete silence. I had noticed that Jaden was messaging someone frantically when we were outside, and he looks at me and says, "Michelle told me she was in the house with her drill team friends like 10 minutes ago. Told me she was only kidding, so what in the hell made those noises?" Backstory. Everyone in the small town knew my grandparents were away, so it was common for my friends to just pop in the house whenever. Especially the drill team gals, because they were some of our closest friends. Right after he says this, I look at the other guys, and all 3 of them are shedding man tears. All 3 of them were shook to their core about what had happened. During that 45-second window of pure chaos, we each felt a sense of dread and hopelessness sweep over us. It was 1000% a bad spirit, or a few that had just been in that house. Well, I have this house for another 6 weeks, and at some point I'm going to have to go back in there and sleep there. So we have to go back in and see what happened. Understandably, they were strongly against this idea, but I felt spiritually strong because of my recent baptism. So I led the way while we single-filedly walked in the house, while each of their hands were grasping the person's shirt in front of them. We should go in the basement first because it's the scariest and most obvious place where the banging noises were coming from, I say. We slowly creep down the basement steps, and I flip on the lights, and see that the living room and kitchen were destroyed. The ceiling fan was laying on the ground, and, at initial glance, had looked like it was ripped straight off the ceiling. There were broken shards of glass and wood chips from the chaos scattered about the room. Now, I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to explain this to my family? Then we decided to search the rest of the house. The only other inexplicable thing was that the master bedroom's closet light was turned on, which we didn't ever turn on. That same night, I decided to go to bed in my room while the guys slept downstairs, because I was on this spiritual high and felt safe. But my friends each felt like they had uninvited the spirit from their sexual endeavors earlier that night, so they all slept in the living room downstairs. Jake woke up the next morning and had a nightmare about a little girl standing in the living room watching them sleep. But Jake loves scary things, so we never really knew whether he was being truthful about that dream or not. He's an extremely honest person, but he loves overhyping these type of things, so I never knew what to make of that dream of his. Fast forward to that weekend. My grandparents came over after my grandpa's radiation treatment, because I told them what happened. They're somewhat religious, but not church fanatics, so they weren't sure what to believe at first, but they knew I wasn't a liar, and so they took my story as truth. I walked downstairs to the basement with my grandparents. My grandpa bent to a knee to look at the ceiling fan's wiring, and he said, "This was cut perfectly across. Someone did this intentionally. This didn't fall out of the ceiling." Since that day, it only furthered my testimony of a god and an evil. As of 2016, I've started to have weekly recurring visitations of a dream where I'm in that house with a dark presence. I honestly might go to therapy after talking to my wife about it, as it seems to have caused lingering PTSD in some type or form for me. I'll be grateful for that night, because it caused for one hell of a story and an everlasting best friendship with those three guys. What are your thoughts? Do you think the silhouettes on the stairs from earlier that night were the same spirits that messed with us? Or do you think they were simply just shadows? Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 260. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it with all your friends and family. As this is the season of giving, give them the gift of Hellfreezer. They'll thank you for it later. Alright, before we go on, we have 2 shoutouts and a birthday shoutout to do, so let's see. First shoutout goes to the author of the first story, that is Reddit user Silverclock510. Thank you very much, Silverclock510, for letting us use your story. And also a shout out to the author of the last story there. And that goes to the Past Magician. Thank you very much, Past Magician, for allowing us to use your story. There may be other stories coming from them later. They did tell me they'd be posting others, and I'm allowed to use those too, which is very nice of them, very generous, appreciate it. Hopefully they don't change their mind after they hear my reading of this story, but I think I did okay. We'll see. All right, and of course, a birthday shout-out goes to Donovan. You'll see Donovan posting in the comments in many, many videos. Donovan had a birthday recently, and I hope you had a great time. Well, I know you had a great time. I know you did. We've spoken. And I hope you and your family have a very excellent holiday season. All right. Now, before we go, I would like to sing Happy Birthday, of course, as is traditional. And then we're going to wrap up. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Donovan. Happy birthday to you. Okay, now I'm going to head off and record tomorrow's video. Yes, there will be a video on Christmas Day, and it will be heartwarming stories. I've been saving them up all year, so heartwarming stories for Christmas Day. Just an update for Glitch fans. Thankfully, no one's been complaining this time. But just to let you know, as you know, health has been poorly, and I'm grateful that you've bared that in mind, and there haven't been people asking, what's Glitch Monthly? Got all the stories for it, so we'll just, as usual, none in December, and we'll do the next one at the end of January, and I've got, like I say, I'll try and record it a bit at a time, so I'm not doing it all at once. That's what I always intend to do, but I'll kind of have to force myself to do that this time. Just a few extra stories here and there, and that should be fine. So hopefully the end of January for the next Glitch Monthly. Okay. And before I go, once I've had my dinner and everything tomorrow, and I've dropped ground and dropped gifts off for family, and gotten hugs, petted the dog, I will, not my dog, my sister's dog, I visit to pet the dog, then I leave. And I am hoping to do a stream, my usual Saturday stream, but also Christmas Day stream, because I usually do one on Christmas Day. I understand, as it is Christmas, that lots of folks will be celebrating with their families, so I'm not expecting a huge turnout, but I will be there if anyone needs a distraction, or if you just don't do Christmas, because not everybody does. Not everyone has to. So I'll be there for a few hours, hopefully, playing spoopy games, and maybe other games. We'll see what we're all in the mood for, eh? Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.